All right, we are back with another edition of the State of Bitcoin podcast, where I'm joined with Sam Callahan of Swan Bitcoin, the Bitcoin analyst for Swan Bitcoin. Sam, how are you doing today?
What's up, Brandon? How you doing, man? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. So, yeah, Sam. So, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us how you got into Bitcoin, and yeah, what brings you here today.
My Bitcoin origin story.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, it's kind of so I've been really into central banking. It sounds weird, but like I had been into studying the global financial crisis. This was probably like 2014. I'd studied biology and physics, but I'd always been interested in markets and financial history. So I had studied kind of like all the bad things about central banking and all the histories of financial crises. And when I studied that, it was kind of depressing because I didn't feel like there was any solution because they had become so large, too big to fail, just kind of intertwined with the regulation and the governments. And I just didn't think that anything could bring them down, to be honest with you. But because of that study, when Bitcoin hit my radar for the first time in 2017, I kind of immediately knew that, it was a big deal. And so it all kind of clicked because I understood the problem that it solved really well at that point. So in 2017, I really jumped down the rabbit hole, like never looked back. Just tried to read everything that I could come across. Back then, there wasn't as much educational resources as there is today. But there were still some like great educators that you just had to kind of know where to find them. So 2017, I just never looked back and, um, wound up at Swan a little bit over a year ago. And now I'm the analyst and I do a lot of the writing and kind of educate our clients about what's going on in the markets and just teach them about Bitcoin.
Yeah, I got you there. So yeah, I mean, I kind of joined Bitcoin in a similar time, but I wasn't maybe as into central banking. My thing was just I wanted to make some money, so I got into it for maybe the number go up, but I kind of stuck around for the hard money principles. So good on you for getting in there for the central banking purposes and everything like that. But yeah, tell me a little bit about your position at Swan. So Bitcoin analyst. It's always got me kind of curious. Like, what does that entail? Like, I know you kind of mentioned a little bit about talking to clients and things like that. Like, do you just kind of explain to them like the ins and outs of Bitcoin? Like, what's an average day of a Bitcoin analyst look like?
So I do a lot of the market commentary, a lot of the writing. So if you've received like a newsletter from Swan, usually I have some kind of role in that. I do a lot of the research. So on the back end, we release the Bitcoin Canon, which is kind of like a kind of archive of Bitcoin content. And so I was kind of the person collecting a lot of the content and archiving it and doing a lot of the back end research. Every month, I do like an insight report, which is a deep dive into a certain topic where I really dive deep. And it's called Run the Numbers. So I literally run the numbers on whatever I'm interested in. And it could be anything from like, breaking down inflation last year of like what we're seeing when it was starting to really rise for us. So kind of explaining that to our clients. To last month, I did a really deep dive into the cross-border payment system and why Lightning is likely to disrupt it. So it's kind of like I have a lot of free reign, but then there is like education about the basics and just teaching our clients about self custody and things like that. But I'd say my role is more, sharing charts, keeping them up to date about what's going on, whatever I find interesting in the market. That's kind of my role at Swan.
That's awesome. So is this position at Swan kind of your first into the Bitcoin realm?
Yeah, I mean, like, so when I started at Swan, I was actually in client services. So, you get your foot in the door. And then after only a few months, because it's such a fast moving startup, you wear a lot of different hats. It's kind of cliche, but, I really was doing like 4 different roles after a couple months. And then they just, they said, Sam, you can write and, we think you got some things to say. And so we basically decided that I would take on an analyst role, and right now I'm the only analyst there. But you know, we're all kind of Bitcoiners at Swan, so everyone's brilliant. Everyone is watching the markets. It's just kind of my direct role to always be focused on the markets and always kind of, educate not just our clients, but internally we have, weekly Zoom meetings, like what's going on in the market so that we can like educate our clients. All our sales team can like know what's going on. I provide them with research or interesting articles. I say like, hey, check this out in case your clients ask about this kind of thing. So that I kind of shifted roles only after a few months, and now I do that full time. So it's been good.
That's awesome. So yeah, let's bring it back a little bit. So yeah, so you brought up like your kind of interest in central banking to kind of get you into the Bitcoin realm, but did I guess maybe your upbringing from your parents or something that happened, or can you kind of point it to something where you kind of gotten interested in investing and maybe diving into money principles? Is it something that's just kind of like you've always been sort of interested in, or is there like maybe a specific moment that you can like kind of think of like,
Yeah,
hey, maybe this is how it clicked?
yeah. I mean, it's a good question. I'd say no. Like a lot of people, I was pretty financially illiterate, in high school and stuff. Like I didn't get taught any of that. But my dad, he was a gold bug. He had a lot of distrust for banks, and I didn't really understand it. He never really sat me down, and I talked to him about it now, and he's like, I just didn't want to make you so cynical so early, because now we just hash out all the time about it. But my dad had the Sovereign Individual and the Fourth Turning on his bookshelf, both written in 1997, I think. So that's kind of my upbringing. And so to age myself a little bit, when I went into college, it was the middle of the global financial crisis, and I went into business school, and I was really turned off by it. I could see through the bullshit, and I saw through the corruption, and partly because of my dad, but just because of like, I just saw through it. And when I was in business school, I was like, I just don't want to be a part of this, like at all. And I was really interested in physics. So I switched majors to biology and physics. Went down this rabbit hole. I was going to go to med school, all this stuff. And then after I kind of got out of school, I finally had like time after I graduated and stuff to look back at the global financial crisis and really understood what happened there. And that kind of led me down my rabbit hole of central banking, which led me to Bitcoin eventually. So I'd say the moment was probably the global financial crisis, and like kind of how it changed my thinking. Also, when I was in business school, they were pushing like Keynesianism dogma on me. And I would always have questions in class, and I just wasn't satisfied with any of the answers that they gave me. I thought that was bullshit too. But at the time, I didn't know anything about Austrian economics. I didn't hear about Bitcoin or anything like that. But I was just turned off by the lack of critical thinking, and really like didn't really explain things, and my questions would get shot down because it was against the dogma, right? So that's kind of my story. And then when I found Bitcoin, that's when I really got into like hard money principles and Austrian economics. And then when I found that, I was like, this is what I had been looking for way back then. But I just unfortunately never came across in my life. But
Yeah, it kind of makes sense. Me and my former co-host Dan, we both went to undergrad together, but then we went to our separate ways in grad school, and we kind of always talked about how we thought that there was like a big lack of critical thinking, like you're saying in education, which I think a lot of Bitcoiners have in common is that we all kind of questioned, why is the status quo like it is? Central banking, whether the monetary policy or whatever, like, why are we accepting this 2% inflation? This doesn't sound right, sort of thing.
yeah,
And yeah. I mean, it's interesting that a lot of the Bitcoiners kind of all came to this conclusion, and that's kind of what led us to a little bit maybe of distrust and things like that, or led us to Bitcoin in the end. But yeah, I think that critical thinking is definitely lacking in the education system, and I think that that's a big issue that we have to get over. And
100%, man.
that'll lead a lot of
Yeah,
people to maybe Bitcoin and other things.
everyone like wants to get into Bitcoin earlier and all this stuff, but like if I would have stayed in business school and accepted the Keynesianism for like not like if I didn't do any critical thinking and I didn't think that it was stupid back then, I might have gone through that. I might be working at some bank, And when I started looking at the central banking afterwards, you come at it with a beginner's mind, is what Jeff Booth says, right? Like, I wasn't tainted with all this other dogma, so I could really view it with fresh eyes and kind of see through the cracks of the system because I wasn't inside the system. So, you wanna be early and stuff like that, but everyone has their own journey, and I wouldn't change mine, and I'm sure probably you feel the same way because you ended up here, and because of your critical thinking, and so that's the most important part.
Yeah, exactly. So, let's bring it a little bit farther with like Swan and that Bitcoin education system. So the thing that I really like about Swan is it seems like a lot of the mission is to educate their clients and educate people that are kind of getting into Bitcoin. And that kind of seems like Swan's mission, at least from like an outsider's perspective of looking in. So on that note, how do you kind of go about orange pilling people and kind of bringing in people on Bitcoin? Do you, try to educate them, or do you just kind of let them come to you? Like, how do you approach like orange pilling friends and family?
Friends and family, it's a little bit different than a client, right? So, friends and family, I've kind of learned they all know I'm the Bitcoin guy at this point, and I've pretty much gotten everybody that I really care about stacking and in self custody. But I've kind of learned with them that you got to wait for them to ask you questions. You can't just like be a fire hose and make them do this, because then they won't really care about it, and they kind of get turned off when you feel like somebody's trying to sell you something, right? Um, but at the same time, it's important to understand that your audience, and it's important to understand what might resonate with them, their beliefs. So if they are, let's say, I don't know, really into financial inclusion and equality, you can bring up those like kind of positives about Bitcoin, the permissionless, and how anybody all over the world can access it with only a phone. Like, and then they'll be like, oh, that's cool, and that kind of like opens the door to it. Like, I didn't know that. So I think really it's really important to know your audience, and then most of the time I start with the problem instead of starting with Bitcoin. So you can't understand the solution until you understand the problem that it solves. And so a lot of people, financial literacy is a big problem, and they don't even understand what inflation is. And they have a bunch of cash in their cash account. They don't even think about this stuff. And so usually I don't even start with Bitcoin. Usually I'm talking about fiat. I'm talking about the problems. And once they kind of hear something that clicks, they're like, man, that's messed up. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, totally. Like, then we get into Bitcoin, and then we kind of talk about it. And then, if I'm talking about Bitcoin to somebody, I think maybe like a rookie Bitcoiner who's just like really pumped about it will kind of be all over the place when they explain it and they start jumping from thing to thing. It's easier to just focus really simply on one thing, and understand that it's a new thing for the other person to kind of wrap their head around. And even though it's more than digital gold, it's a great place to start because people can kind of wrap their heads around that. Like, it's digital gold that can teleport, or something like that. And then from there, you can kind of build a base because, you and I probably know it's a lot more than just digital gold, but that seems to be an easy way for people to begin to understand it. And then I point them to the right resources, and that can be any, depending on what they like. Ask them if they like podcasts. Do you like videos? Ask them what they like to consume, and then I have my go-to for each type of media. So that's pretty much my playbook.
There you go. Nice. Yeah, it seems like a good way to go about it. Yeah, and I've kind of noticed too the same thing is like if you let people come to you, you're usually a little bit more successful than necessarily going and hounding them and just saying, "Hey, read this, watch this, whatever." So yeah, I
Yeah,
agree
that's
with you too.
for sure.
Yeah.
And then clients are already coming to us because they're already interested. So it's kind of easier game there because they're like interested in us. They found Swan, and they have other questions and they've kind of like thought about it a little bit more, um, than just somebody who you're drinking a beer at the bar or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So now I want to ask you a question, maybe a little bit along the lines about Swan. So one thing that I think is really interesting that Swan offers is that they have a buy but no sell button. So how do you approach that? Like maybe you don't have to go into the full spiel about clients or anything like that. But if you're trying to orange pill them and send them to Swan, what do you say to them when they get a little afraid, like, hey, there's a buy, but not a sell button on here. So what happens if, a lot of
Mhm.
things going on right now, especially they're seeing the big market dips and they say, maybe I wanted to get out at, X point. What do I do, or how do I approach that if when there's no sell button on Swan?
Yeah, well, that was kind of the genius of Corey, but it's because we don't want them to sell. We don't really think there's any reason to sell, and we want them. We want to promote long-term investing. We think that's the way to win in Bitcoin is to hodl and to hold it for a long time and to protect people from their own emotions, and because most people will sell at the absolute worst time. Having said that, we do have that function. We just don't advertise it. So if a client really needed to sell, they could reach out to us and we can sell it on their behalf, but we don't put it on the front end. So we can't have any like panic selling going on. So that's kind of like the short story. Like if they told me they need really like I need to sell, I have a medical bill, like we can do that for them. But we do that to protect them, and I send all that's why I send all my friends and family there. Like my brothers are on there and stuff like that, and they would like right now, like the market's down, like they wouldn't even know how to sell, and I don't think I would tell them. But if they really wanted to, like we can do it for them on the back end.
I gotcha. So, all right. Well, so say that they could figure out how to sell. How would you kind of, I guess, justify it? Or somebody that's a newbie that just got in and then say they bought it at 40 and now it's crashing down late. How would you kind of, I guess, sell them to be like, hey, you're in the right asset right now. Just, hold on for a little bit longer, or just keep holding on, or expand your time frame. How would you kind of sell them on that to I guess lessen maybe the freak out that they have, or the emotional drive to try to want to sell?
Yeah, I like to just remind them like why they initially bought it, which was all the inflation that we're seeing, all the you know basically instability that we're seeing in the traditional financial system, and owning something outside that financial system and something that you own is really powerful and it's really valuable. And so you don't want to sell your insurance when everything seems to be on fire. And then just making them understand that like, hey, when we talked about this when you first bought it, we said that you would hold it for 5 years. So like, why are you thinking about selling it now when your original plan was to sell it for longer? And then you can throw in a stat. Anybody who's held Bitcoin for more than 4 years is in the green historically. And you potentially could be selling at one of the worst times, and you might be kicking yourself for years and years and years from selling this. So it's kind of like a combination of those three things. Like, know what you own, know why you bought it in the first place, and then understand that selling when it's down, 15% or whatever it is, historically, that's just a terrible decision to make in any investment. So that's kind of, that would be my gist.
Yeah, I kind of tell them to zoom out and just keep looking. But you mentioned
Yeah.
something there, and that kind of ties to the first story. So let's jump into a little bit of current events that are kind of surrounding Bitcoin, and maybe like the greater economics of the globe, and the United States specifically. But on Tuesday we had the CPI release of the month of April, and that was 8.3%. So it was 0.2% less than March, which was 8.5. But as both you and I know, it's year over year that they present, and so even though it was like a 2.2% drop, it's still increasing over time, and rapidly, kind of increasing. And as we zoom out over time too, that 2% inflation just kind of exponentially grows over time too. So what do you think of I guess the strength of the dollar going forward, and do you still view Bitcoin kind of as like an inflation hedge?
Um, I guess I'll start with maybe the second question. I absolutely view Bitcoin as an inflation hedge, and I think if you look at when inflation started to really pick up, which was late 2021, I consider Bitcoin like the ultimate leading indicator because it trades 24/7. It's the most liquid. It's also, you could say, it's still considered a risk on asset in terms of the general market, how it views it. And so it's like a leading indicator of even stocks. It's kind of like before stocks even in terms of its leading indicator. So Bitcoin essentially front ran the inflation because everyone kind of was afraid of that after the March 2020 breakdown. And over the summer, you really started seeing Bitcoin break its all-time high, its previous all-time high, and then start to break out as it kind of front ran the inflation. And so I think it's just Bitcoin's a leading indicator, and then the CPI is a lagging indicator. So we had that kind of dynamic going on. And then if you look at, say, Bitcoin when it started to rise over the summer of 2020, before the inflation really started hitting, because it's a lagging indicator, if you put it against any other fiat currency from that time onwards, it has performed amazing as an inflation hedge. It has done exactly that. And all you have to do is if you held Bitcoin, your purchasing power is up since then. Like that's all you need to know. It's performed great as an inflation hedge. And I think people kind of misunderstand. They expect this to move in lockstep. But that's not how it works because one's a lagging indicator and the other's a leading indicator. So that's kind of how I view it. And then also it's just properties, theoretically should make it a good inflation hedge. It's scarcity and its network effect combined should make it a really good inflation hedge. And so I think we'll continue to see that, and that'll become clearer and clearer over time. In terms of the inflation in general, yeah, man, it's interesting because the Fed's raising rates and it dropped off from 8.5 to 8.3. Still multi-decade highs, still the highest since 40 years, even with the Fed raising rates. So they have to be a little bit worried about that, I would say. And I think a lot of people are starting to realize that the transitory narrative was complete bullshit and that this probably is more structural in nature because we have a lot of things. It's kind of like the perfect cocktail of inflation. Had all this money printing, all this fiscal stimulus, which probably aided some of this like initial inflation, but then you have actual structural issues of deglobalization. We still have a lot of supply chain disruptions. We got new lockdowns in China. We got a war that's causing commodities to spike. They said it went down a little bit because gasoline kind of dropped down. But the CPI measures the rate of change, and these prices aren't going to go back down to what they were. And I'd be very surprised if they get down to 2% anytime soon. And so it's a lot of jaw boning from the Fed about this. And, part of me feels like they want the inflation high to kind of melt down the debt that they got. But they also don't want to, piss everybody off because they're saving slowly but surely, especially the poorest among us. So that's kind of my rant on inflation. But, I see it kind of staying a little bit high because of those structural reasons, unless the Fed really brings out a bazooka and raises rates like 75 bips or something at the June meeting.
Yeah, it seems like I'm maybe not as well versed in economics as you are, but it seems like to me, that my little time in Bitcoin that um, that the Fed is kind of kicking the can down the road, so to speak. That in a recession or something along those lines, an economic downturn is kind of looming, and that raising rates and after this and a ton of stimulus that they printed out in 2020, 2021 is just kind of an inevitable thing that's going to happen, and that inflation is just going to come and hit us really bad. And it seems like it's already hitting a lot of cities. A lot of major cities are seeing increased rents, housing prices, a lot of things like that. I just think it's kind of interesting that the stock market specifically, and in Bitcoin, in a lesser extent, maybe the crypto markets are everything, which seemed to be booming at initial, turn when, this money printing was going on, is kind of taking a big downturn right now. Do you kind of see that because you as you described it, as kind of like a lagging indicator that everybody's I guess maybe fleeing to cash right now because they're seeing major inflation, and maybe they're kind of worried about an economic downturn?
Yeah, like because like all these companies, basically rising inflation is rising costs for them, and so it's starting to eat into their profit margins, as well as wages are going up. So businesses' number one costs are labor costs, and when you have people demanding wage increases because they're feeling the inflation, food prices are at all-time high. I've always said this, like people can shrug off high gasoline prices because you can kind of work around it. Like you can try to ride a bike, maybe you carpool, maybe you do all these different things to kind of work around these rising gas prices. But when you feel like you can't put food on the table with your paycheck, you're going to be going into your boss's door, office, I mean, and demanding a raise. And so you're seeing wages increasing. They're not increasing at the same rate as the inflation, but they're increasing. And so these businesses are having increased labor costs plus increased costs of all of their, products and everything, their fuel. So that starts to eat into their profits, and then you're seeing, the stock market start to kind of expect that, and you're starting to see sell-offs as well as all these other factors, right? So there's just a lot of fear in the market, and yeah, that's kind of like how I see it. Um, and I kind of forgot your second half of the question, but yeah, man, that's kind of how I think about it. And hopefully we start to see it relent a little bit because I really think that inflation is understated. Like for instance, rent.com measured increased rent at 22%, but the CPI measures it at 4.5%, and it's just completely understates the inflation that people are feeling. And like I said, food prices at all-time high, and it hurts the poorest people among us. So like, I hope it relents a little bit because I think people are really suffering, and right now they're going into a bunch of credit card debt to try to keep things going, but that's not sustainable. So we'll kind of see what happens over the next couple of months, but it should be it's an interesting time in the markets for sure.
And I think it's even more interesting, when you kind of try to bring people to Bitcoin because they see the immense amount of volatility. But when you kind of explain to them, or at least my experience explaining to them is like, it's volatile when you just kind of look at it in dollar terms. And you brought up rent and other things about inflation, and the CPI reported numbers. I thought it was interesting too. I mean, they couldn't even avoid some of the inflation numbers that they were reporting. So I have it up in front of me. So I'll read off a couple, and specifically, I think it's really interesting in the energy sector, where they're looking at fuel and oil, which in the United States everybody's kind of complaining about rising gas prices. That reported CPI year over year is 80.5%, and then we have energy commodities up 44.7%. And then, gasoline of all types up 43.6%. So it seems just like, although they report this 8.3% number, a lot of different things that, to live your day-to-day life, is rising drastically more than that. So do you, in your experience, when you're kind of explaining to people that, this is, somewhat of like Bitcoin, somewhat of an inflation hedge and other things like that, when you're kind of going into the weeds of inflation and devaluing of the dollar, do you bring up the CPI number at all, or do you kind of like explain to them, like, you notice that you go to the grocery store and it used to be $100, now it's 150, or kind of how do you go about explaining just general inflation to them?
Definitely the latter, because honestly, nobody cares about the CPI if you're not in finance. Nobody even knows what the CPI is. I mean, some people might, but um, I for some reason I like talking about like baseball games because I'm like, what's the hot dog or the beer that you drink now? And they're always like, oh, it was like $12 for a beer, and I was like, yeah, but it's the same beer, right? It's the same amount of beer, but you're paying $12 for it. So it's not that you're getting more value. It's that your dollars can't buy as much value as they were before. And I don't know why, but that seems to get the point across really well for people. So I guess it's more like the latter of just explaining to them, like this isn't just like a phenomenon, like prices just like magically go up like this. This is like a policy decision. This is what they're doing, and if your wages aren't keeping up with that, you're losing, because, or if you're if your money's just sitting in the bank account and it's not growing at the same rate as inflation, that's the Michael Saylor like ice cube analogy. It's like an ice cube melting, right? And so just kind of breaking it down more simply, I find is much, much more effective. And I think it shows, that you actually understand the subject matter if you could dumb it down. And we didn't really talk about this, but I was a sports physical therapist for a couple of years, and I was a director of rehab. So I had to explain physiology and anatomy to people that were sometimes they were 14, sometimes they didn't have a lot of education. But how do you explain really complex topics to people in a way that they understand? And that's the same thing with Bitcoin. It's the same thing with finance. And so that's what you have to think about. It goes back to know your audience and know their level of understanding. Am I going to explain Bitcoin the same way to a financial advisor or hedge fund manager as my friend who works in construction? Like, no, you have to switch it up. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I go about explaining inflation. Now, if they were more educated, yeah, I'll bring up the CPI and I'll tell them why it's bullshit, and we'll go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, it's just about understanding who you're talking to.
Gotcha, and that makes sense too, and that's pretty interesting. Yeah, that you have more of a physical therapy background, because my research in college and grad school was focused around biomechanics. So I kind of had the same issue where it was like explaining the throwing motion, but or I would speak to a coach and they would say the jersey pops this way, or I'd have to get that into more of a technical term to explain to my colleagues and then kind of relay it back to the coach and things like that. So you kind of have to know your audience too, the way you're describing it. So yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. When you're kind of explaining these complex financial topics, you kind of have to do it based on your audience, based on who you're talking to. And if maybe it's just the average person, you gotta maybe use a sports analogy or bring it to beer, because everybody experiences
I mean, everyone's like, oh my god, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and like my experience there, it helps me every day at Swan. Like, it really does. It's actually easier because when I was a sports PT, they'd be in pain. They'd be having a hard time. It's not like this is easy. Like, just like explaining it to somebody over the phone, and they're doing fine, I'm doing fine. A lot harder to explain anatomy and physiology to somebody who's in a bunch of pain and their life's at like an all-time low. So yeah, I think there's a lot of translation between professions that maybe people don't think about. And if somebody's like listen to this feeling like they can't work in Bitcoin or something like that, just know like there's a lot of translation. And if you're really passionate about this, you can make it work. That's just my little tip.
Yeah, so right there. I agree with you too, because now I have a job with a Bitcoin related company too, and I think it's more so like kind of when you go down the rabbit hole, it's more like the proof of work, right? So the proof of work in the Bitcoin realm, and that kind of brings me to our next topic, or along the lines of our next topic. So there's been a lot of news around the shitcoin rug pulls that are going on. So if you haven't been following, you might be off of Twitter or somewhere else. But Luna and Terra USD or USDT have been absolutely rug pulled. So Luna was trading around $120, I believe, and now it's under 1 cent at the time of this recording. And then UST, which is supposed to track the US dollar, fell from tracking about $1 to as low as 27 cents. So their stable coin has been anything but stable. So when you're kind of onboarding people to Bitcoin, how do you kind of differentiate Bitcoin from these other shit coins and other projects that are going along?
Yeah, well, I actually wrote a 2-part series on the Swan blog about this. It's called Why Bitcoin is Different. So you can go check that out if you want, but I'll kind of rehash what I wrote in there. The first thing is just like Bitcoin is leaderless and everything else is a founding team. It sounds simple, but it's actually like a huge difference. You can't really replicate Satoshi, can't really replicate the grassroots movement that was Bitcoin. You can't, Bitcoin was the invention of digital scarcity, and everything else is just kind of a copycat. If you know who the founders are, that's already a red flag, in my opinion. And then it's truly decentralized, right? So that kind of goes into what I just said. But the fact that the monetary policy has never changed is a testament to its decentralization, because it's extremely difficult to change. And if you just compare Bitcoin's monetary policy history with Ethereum's, it's clear as day, because one looks like it's run by math and an algorithm. It's very step by step, stays the same. And then you got Ethereum's, which is run by humans, a small group of humans, but it's like all over the place, like the Fed, because they just change decisions and they hard fork, and that's a big difference, right? And then the other one is the energy, which is, I have a physics background, so I think the energy of Bitcoin is a huge feature. It kind of levels the playing field for miners, and creates this fair environment for nobody to cheat, because you can't cheat energy. So there's like the laws of thermodynamics that underline Bitcoin. You can never create or destroy energy, can merely transfer it. So that is a huge difference between Bitcoin and every other one of these proof of stake coins. And it's really important to understand that, right? And then the scarcity. So it goes back, they're all kind of connected, but it goes back to the fact that it's decentralized and it's censorship resistant. And that's a function of the 21 million. So if you can't change the monetary policy, you can trust that there will only be 21 million Bitcoin. And that's kind of the whole point. That's how it maintains value, that it maintains its scarcity. If you can easily change it, then you can't trust that the supply won't be changed in the future. And so all of these things are kind of intertwined with one another, but all of them together make Bitcoin extremely unique. And it takes a special understanding of game theory and monetary economics and all these other things to understand that. But that's kind of why I wrote those blog posts, to understand there's Bitcoin and then there's shitcoins. And a lot of people get stuck into the shitcoin cycle, where they find Bitcoin and they go, oh, look at these shiny things. And then they kind of lose money and then they end up back in Bitcoin. And I'm trying to get people to like, don't do that and just stick to Bitcoin from the get-go. And that you'll have a lot better time, I think. So that's kind of how I go about that question. But there's more to it. That's why there's 2 parts to that series. There's just a lot of explaining to do.
Yeah, I gotcha. And I'll link those 2 blogs in the show notes too. So for if anybody listening or watching, if you want to check that out, I'll have it in the comments or the show notes below. So be sure to check out his blog. Sam does a great job of explaining it. And yeah, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of deeper explanations in there. But I think at the end of the day, just kind of explaining the decentralized nature of it. Just because I think the big headlines were the Luna network got, like, their blockchain was shut down or shut off, and then they started it back up, and that was kind of, and then because it lost its peg, that was kind of like why they did it. And I don't know, it just kind of, it makes sense there that why, obviously, if it's run by people and it's not truly decentralized like Bitcoin, in order for something like this to happen with Bitcoin, thousands and thousands of people, maybe even millions of people, and mining machines around the world would need to synchronize at the same time to completely shut off, along with nodes and everything like that, and getting everybody to cooperate in that sense of nature. And some of these miners, I'm sure, are like to places where maybe they're not like easily accessible, or it's not easy to turn off. It would be a very difficult task, I think, to truly shut down the Bitcoin network, making it almost impossible. So I think these rug pulls and these other things hopefully don't turn people away from Bitcoin. And I'm seeing a lot of viral tweets go along that say, like, I turned into a Bitcoin maxi today and I started my DCA because of what's going on with Luna, and kind of maybe trying to gaming or buying into these other things. So I hope that at the end of the day, although people lost some money, that it kind of turns more people towards Bitcoin, and towards learning why Bitcoin and Bitcoin only.
Yeah, man, I think that's a good take. Like personally, I have a lot of empathy for the victims. That's kind of why I try to push Bitcoin on people because I want to try to avoid this, because people are really hurt out there, man. Like it's real. Like people forget about the victims, which are typically retail investors who didn't know. But if there's one highlight, it's what you just said. It clearly demonstrates why Bitcoin's different, and you're seeing this kind of change the last couple of days of people starting to get that now. And the problem is that decentralization is one of these things that you don't know it until you need it. And all these things can pretend like they're decentralized, but when shit hits the fan, not only do they prove that they're less secure than Bitcoin, but they also try to actively, unilaterally fix the problem. And that's when they know it's not decentralized in the first place. So a lot of these things are decentralized in name only. They're false marketing. That's what kind of attracts these retail investors in, and then they lose their life savings. And so that's kind of the shitcoin cycle that I'm trying to get people to not go into. And if there's one positive of this whole Luna debacle, it is that I think more people are waking up to that fact.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So there's unfortunately a lot of I feel like FUD going along the lines of this week. So we're going to kind of another viral thing that was going along with Twitter, but Coinbase and other exchanges. I saw Block in their investor letter also said this, but Coinbase added a disclaimer that what would happen to your crypto assets if Coinbase were to go bankrupt. So essentially they would say if Coinbase goes bankrupt or Block or one of these other exchanges, that the SEC could theoretically seize all of your crypto assets that you have on their exchange. And it's called the SAB 121. And I'll be linking that in the show notes as well for those that are interested in looking in on there. But it seemed like everybody was kind of like jumping at Coinbase, and Coinbase's stock fell pretty dramatically, making it seem like, although, it's a fairly strong financial company and has a lot of other things, and, whatever, no matter what your opinion is about Coinbase, it's probably a decent ways away from going bankrupt, but, there's always that chance. I guess the worries that I have surrounding this is, a lot of people leaving their assets on exchanges and things like that. Have you noticed that maybe in recent conversations or things like that that because of situations like this, it might be easier to explain why you should get your Bitcoin off of exchanges, or I guess on a normal day to day, how do you normally explain why it's safer to self custody opposed to having it on an exchange like a Coinbase?
Yeah. With that specific news, like the bankruptcy, like from what I understand, that's pretty common SEC disclosure. And I think people kind of ran with it because, I mean, if anybody, was part of the Quadriga fiasco or Mt. Gox, like your funds are tied up in bankruptcy for a long, long time. And yeah, you're not going to get, a lot of the times, you're not going to get fair value back. And so that's kind of the risks of these things. And I think people just need to see it in the financial documents to really get it. To me, it's waking people up to not your keys, not your coin, which is great. And personally, I think Coinbase is a terrible company. I think they hate their clients. I think they peddle unregistered digital securities. I think they encourage people to trade. So they have like perverse incentives. Basically, make all their money off transaction fees. And so they'll never tell people to just save in Bitcoin, even though it's the right thing to do. They'll peddle these shit coins on them and encourage them to all be day traders to make money. They also make their money off coin listing fees. And they have terrible due diligence. They literally list scams, and ones that suffer giant hacks. And they recommend them. Last month, they recommended their 10 top coins. Bitcoin wasn't even on it. And what was on it was Axie Infinity 2 weeks after they suffered a 625 million hack. So that's how much Coinbase loves their clients. They recommend coins 2 weeks after a huge hack on them. And the last thing is custodial fees. And so they discourage self-custody because they make money off custodial fees, which they're talking about with the bankruptcy thing, right? And then they also charge a withdrawal fee to take self-custody of your coins. And so I think Coinbase has terrible culture. I don't know a single person who's like a Coinbase super fan. Anybody who's tried to talk on the phone with them knows that their customer service is just atrocious. Go look at Trustpilot; they have like half a star because they're just garbage. And I think that they're a stain on the industry. They're not a Bitcoin company; they're a crypto company. I have a lot of strong views about Coinbase right now.
Hey, I
I,
like it. Go off, King.
dude, I just think Brian Armstrong has said they are not a Bitcoin company; they're a crypto company. They they had zero presence at Bitcoin 2022. They were lead sponsor at Permissionless. They, like I said, they don't care about their clients. If you type in Bitcoin on their blog, 10 articles come up. If you type in Ethereum on their blog, 10 articles come up. The Ethereum ones, their read time is like 58 minutes total. The Bitcoin is like 28. So they're more in-depth articles. They talk about how Ethereum is going to change the world. Very positive. The Bitcoin one, the first four are about Bitcoin Cash, and then they're about Bitcoin Gold. They're not even about Bitcoin. And then the sixth one is Brian Armstrong declaring that they're not a Bitcoin company. And if you're a beginner and you're searching Bitcoin trying to learn about it, these are the articles that pop up, and it just really pisses me off because these noobs get into these shitcoins and they're not taught anything about Bitcoin, even though it makes up almost 50% of their revenue still. So you would think they would want to educate people on their number one product, but no, they don't, because they don't want them to save. They want them to trade themselves into oblivion. And so I think Coinbase deserves scrutiny, and that's kind of my rant about it. But they're just not a good company, like period. And it's about time that we stood up. And the SEC says self-regulation, and I'm about to release a pretty damning report on Coinbase on their listing practices here coming up, and it's a form of self-regulation because I don't think they have clients' best interests at heart, and they are the ones that should be held responsible for this Luna fiasco, for listing shit like Luna that their clients all lose their life savings on. Like, that's who the blame should go. It should go to the people peddling Luna, Do Kwon, the founder, it should be the VCs, and it should be the exchanges that list them and give these things to the public for them to lose their life savings. So extremely critical of Coinbase. And I know it comes from somebody who's like technically a competitor, but I don't even think that's the case because I work at a Bitcoin company and they work at a crypto bucket shop. So that's my rant on Coinbase.
Hey man, I like it. I like it. But I mean, you didn't say anything that's I think is incorrect at all. I think that at the end of the day, they make most of their money. Although it is like 50% of the revenues from Bitcoin, I think that they make higher margins from pumping these shit coins. And I think that that's, they kind of got into the game on Bitcoin and then they realized like, hey, I can make more fiat by doing these other things like pumping NFTs, coming out with that NFT marketplace and all these other things. And at the end of the day, they're not really looking out for the investor or their clients at all. So I mean, I agree with you 100%. If you would have asked me maybe 5 or so years ago when I got into it, what exchange to use, I would have maybe suggested Coinbase or one of these other ones because it was one that was more accessible at the time. But right now, I mean, I think I ran a poll like a couple months ago. It was like, what exchange would you use to kind of orange pill people? And the top two answers that I got were Cash App because everybody's got it on their phone, or Swan because of the educational resources and things like that you guys offer. Compared to like, I think I got like 0 votes on Coinbase actually. So I think, everybody that's along the lines of Bitcoin Twitter and kind of gets in the weeds realizes that they charge just massive amounts of fees compared to everybody else. And that, they just kind of lead you to these other shit coins that, like the situation with Luna, although it's like really unfortunate, I agree with you there that it's a lot of these people like, that I don't really blame the average retail investor because like they shouldn't have been exposed to this stuff. And I'm sure that there was, maybe Luna articles or maybe emails being sent to some Coinbase users, like pumping this thing or something along those lines where it's like, they're encouraging people to purchase this shit coin and then, they make a lot of paper gains at the beginning, then it don't sell. And then all of a sudden, like they wake up one day and they lose, thousands of dollars because of it.
Yeah,
It's
and then
just,
And then some of them will associate that with Bitcoin, and they'll not come back. All right. And so it's the reality that most people, it's still the largest exchange in the United States. There's 98 million verified users, and that includes institutions and stuff. But it's usually the first contact with Bitcoin for still a lot of people. They got such a head start. They captured a lot of market, and everyone knows the name Coinbase. There's like stadiums named after it and things like that. And they don't understand the differences because of the nuance between, we talked about earlier about Bitcoin and these other cryptocurrencies. And then combine that with their, you know, I would say questionable marketing tactics. Let's just say that. And that's why I just get really riled up about it, man, because I don't think it's right. I really don't think it's right. And I think it falls on Coinbase itself, and it falls on the SEC for letting this go on. Because to me, these shitcoins are obviously securities. I think they fit the Howey test pretty clearly. So I don't really know what they're waiting for.
Yeah, and hopefully, after all this stuff, maybe we'll see a little bit of a change and maybe more regulations on shitcoins opposed to Bitcoin. But let's get into a little bit, I guess, brighter note of the story. So El Salvador, they have bought the dip yet again. So I think we're in a really interesting time now where we got recently, the Central African Republic made Bitcoin legal tender, and we got El Salvador and Bukele. I like to call him Big Balls Bukele because it seems like every time there's a dip or something along those lines, or somebody's testing him, he just dives his feet, right back into Bitcoin. So, they announced that they purchased another 500 Bitcoin at the average price of, just under 31,000. So how do you, I guess, view Bukele as a whole for the Bitcoin space and, the country of El Salvador?
Well, I think Big Balls Bukele is the right thing. And I think he really is orange pilled. Like I've talked with Stacy and Max, and they're on the ground there, and they think that he's the real deal, and they really, really believe. And from their conversations with him, and he's extremely orange pilled, and it takes a lot of guts to be the first one of anything. And right now they're adopting Bitcoin, and people are like, oh, a little bit impatient, like, oh, the volcano bonds delayed and all this stuff. I'm like, it's been months. It's like it hasn't even been a year, and they're the first ones to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. They're a huge guinea pig here, but it's coming along, and it's already provided a lot of financial inclusion for El Salvadorans who have struggled with that for about 2 decades of failed IMF policy to include them into the financial system. About 23% of El Salvadorans had access to financial services before Bitcoin. After 2 months, over 60% did. So basically, provided financial services for more people in 2 months than the IMF did in 2 decades. So if that's not enough, I don't really know what to say. On top of that, I think it's just going to be, slowly improve. It's a very new thing. It's a developing country, and this is a new technology that they're all going to have to get used to. So the fact that he bought the dip is amazing. I think to me, he's proven it. Like, he's kind of proven it himself. If he bought this dip, it's been a rocky road in terms of the volatility of the last year, and he's really showing his conviction. Now, I don't want to put him up on a pedestal because there's other aspects of him that deserve some criticism. But at the same time, what he's doing for his people to try to provide a more prosperous, stable economic environment for the future, I think it should be applauded. And anybody who stood up against the IMF in the past usually ends up in a plane crash or something. So when you say big balls, that's kind of what I'm talking about. I'm not really talking about standing up to international financial institutions who have tried to control their policies and trying to take the sovereign rights of this country back. And that takes a lot of guts. And that's why I stand behind them, because I think it's about time that more people do it. And I think we're going to see a domino effect where more people see El Salvador and they say, "Oh, wait, we can stand up to these goons." and so that's what I'm hopeful for. I think we're going to see it too. So that's kind of my thoughts on El Salvador. I think it's the first one. I think we need to be patient. I think Bukele is a Bitcoiner, through and through. I think he understands it, and I think what he's doing is going to benefit El Salvador in the long run.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think a lot of people like to jump at the first, weakness or crack or something along those lines. And maybe if it was in the United States or maybe a more established country, it would be a little bit different. But I think the size of El Salvador and just kind of like the economics status of it too, kind of allows for it to kind of be the guinea pig, go through a little bit of the bumps in the road here or there to kind of figure it out. And, I think I agree with your sentiment there. Whereas like some aspects, maybe we don't need to applaud all of it, but I think the way that he digs his feet into the ground and, really believes in Bitcoin and is trying to provide economic freedom to a lot of El Salvadorians is definitely should be applauded. And I think, at the end of the day, he's doing a lot of good for El Salvador. And at the very least, the IMF is now paying attention to El Salvador, which maybe they didn't before. And so I think overall it's been an experiment for sure, and I think it's been successful in the fact that it's getting them a lot of exposure, and it seems like like you said, getting a lot of their people more banked or access to their money and things like that too. So I look forward to seeing the future of El Salvador kind of start to prosper, and I think maybe a lot of Bitcoiners too might be moving out there or venturing out there as well.
Yeah, I definitely want to check it out, and he's a great memer too. So you got to respect his meme game.
Yeah, he definitely understands Bitcoin Twitter too, which is
Yeah,
awesome.
I think he's been here for a while. I think he's been
Yeah.
lurking.
Yeah, it's pretty funny now. Like we're seeing like him kind of it was maybe so like Obama was kind of the first president where we had Twitter, and then kind of Trump was in there with maybe the mean tweets or here and there. But now we're seeing like all these politicians on Twitter and social media just kind of almost like going at each other, and it's kind of funny to see Bukele just so accessible, like replying to people and just straight up going at the IMF publicly on a platform like Twitter where everybody has access. So, um, that aspect of it too, I think he definitely understands, the Bitcoin, Twitter, the memes and all that kind of stuff too, and buying the dip and all that. So, I think he's really good for the space and, taking the risk that he did to be the first country is, definitely should be applauded.
Yeah, man, I agree.
Yeah, and so along those lines, recently he also tweeted out their plans for Bitcoin City. So I don't know if you saw this, but Bitcoin City is essentially at the base of the I'm not even going to pronounce it, but base of a volcano in El Salvador, and essentially they're going to use this volcano to harness the geothermal energy to mine Bitcoin and to provide energy to the citizens of this city. Therefore, the city will have 0% CO2 emissions. So the construction of the city will be funded through their El Salvador's Bitcoin bonds. I believe 500 million will be towards the construction of the city, and 500 million will be to purchase more Bitcoin. So yeah, what do you think of, I guess, like the first Bitcoin City that seems to be funded around almost like marketing of Bitcoin, and just overall like the first implementation of I guess bonds and funding through Bitcoin as a whole to fund a construction of a full like state of the art city.
Well, the city itself, I mean, it seems like pretty far away. It seems a little bit like a marketing thing, but not that I don't think they're like building it, but it's trying to get people pumped, trying to attract people, tourism and things like that. It looks cool, like the plan, the models look sweet. Like, I hope it works out. I think the bond is a huge story. I think that's like I've dug into IMF stuff a lot, and that's the big deal here, is that if you could raise funds and bypass the IMF, bypass the World Bank, and not have to use them, that's a big deal, because that bond doesn't come with any of the IMF's terms and conditions of like, hey, you need to do this, you need to do this to get the money. Um, it's just Bitcoin. So Bitcoin doesn't discriminate. Bitcoin won't tell you how to use the funds. And so I really think the Bitcoin bond, or the volcano bond, is a really big deal for that reason. And it's a way to raise funds while maintaining their sovereign rights. And that's what nations give up when they go into debt with the IMF. And so I believe, yeah, like you said, I think half of it was to buy Bitcoin and half of it was to fund the mining operations and the city. And we're still waiting for that bond to be issued. So we'll see how the if it's oversubscribed or how that works out. I think it will be. And I think it will be just because there's a lot of people who hate the IMF and who want to support somebody who's trying to support Bitcoin and do something different. And I think there's a lot of Bitcoiners all over the world that will buy into that bond, just to signal that, literally. And so I think it's a really cool idea. I think mining with geothermal is an amazing idea. I think they have access energy, and it's all a good idea. I'm not a miner, but it comes down to execution. It comes down to building out the right operations and being smart about that. You could mess up. So that's why they're bringing in Bitcoin experts. That's why Samson was there, and all these things to help them make sure that they kind of execute, and they don't misallocate those funds, because in a way they kind of get one shot at this thing, right? So I think it's really cool, and we'll see what happens with it. Like you said, they're the guinea pigs, so this is kind of an experiment, and I'm excited. And I'm excited to see what happens, and maybe in 30 years, Bitcoin City will look like Singapore or something. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be interesting to kind of watch this all play out in real time. I think, a lot of people are skeptical about, Bitcoin becoming legal tender and things like that. But, you've seen El Salvador's infrastructure, go up, a lot of people coming and visiting and things like that. So kind of like we discussed in the last segment, that there's been a lot of positives, although the volatility has kind of gone down, and maybe, might be lower than their cost basis at this point. But, I think, overall, like we've been kind of hammering, is that they're the guinea pig. There's going to be some bumps in the road, and there hasn't been enough bumps in the road to discourage other countries, as we saw the Central African Republic kind of get on board and do that. So I think a lot of these maybe smaller countries will kind of get on board, and maybe name Bitcoin as legal tender going forward. But I think it'll kind of start the domino effect to kind of encourage countries like, hey, look at what we're doing over here. We're creating this full city, state of the art, all this stuff based on some of the excess energy that we have in our own country. And we're harnessing that to make, this, incredible city. And I think, maybe a lot of these smaller countries might see that and decide like, hey, they're doing it. Let's maybe get some advice from them, and let's move forward on making Bitcoin legal tender as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Love it. Yeah,
Yes.
man. I think so. I think we're just at the start, and it's exciting, and we're at the start of this sovereign debt or sovereign market kind of starting to adopt Bitcoin, and it's really exciting. It's really exciting. If you would have told me like a few years ago that sovereign nations would be like putting in legislation to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, I think I would have been like, oh my gosh, I was like, I gotta have more Bitcoin. I gotta buy more. So it's super exciting. It's kind of like playing out how we thought it would play out, and really, it's just the game theory. It's just incentives, and it's incentives in Bitcoin that are powerful to adopt it, and it's also disincentives in the fiat system that's making people really question if there's a better way.
Yeah, so along those lines of smaller countries, well, maybe not smaller countries as in population wise, but Argentina, their central bank has come out and kind of said that they want to prevent or disencourage people from making Bitcoin and crypto transactions. What I thought was really interesting is, you look at Argentina's inflation. Their March numbers that they published was 51.3% inflation for year over year, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. But I think the interesting part of this story is that Argentina cut a $45 billion deal with the IMF to avoid defaulting on their debts. And, they then coincidentally, a little bit later, their central bank of Argentina is now trying to discourage the use of cryptocurrency. So, do you kind of see that this kind of being a roadblock going forward? Is that the IMF is kind of going to start, maybe if they cut a deal with a country or do something along those lines, that they're going to say like, hey, in order for us to cut this deal, you're going to need to, discourage the use of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies to a lesser extent.
100%. 100%. This is what they do. This is what the IMF does. With Argentina specifically, the relationship with the IMF and Argentina is ridiculous. Like it's literally, there's multiple books on it. Paul Bloomstein wrote a book. I forgot what it's called. The money kept rolling in, I think. But they defaulted like I don't know how many times. I think it's like this is like the fourth or fifth time or they defaulted. And so it really speaks to the IMF because this is what the IMF does. They entrap nations in debt. So they basically have economists come in and they say, hey, we're going to build this, we're going to build this amazing new electrical grid. It's going to provide this much GDP. We're going to build highways. Our economists did all these modeling. It's going to bring this amount of GDP growth. It's going to be great. Take on all this debt. Well, it always comes up short, and it's misallocation of capital. There's corruption at the government level, especially in Argentina, a lot of embezzlement. The funds aren't used properly. It never returns the GDP growth at the IMF, and now they have a huge debt burden to deal with. And so what do? They come back to the IMF, and so the IMF creates, these nations depend on the IMF because of the amount of debt, and then they just bring on more debt, and then it's this cycle where the IMF makes them even more dependent on them, and so basically creates their own business because that's what the IMF is. And so with each loan that Argentina gets, the IMF asks for more. Okay, we'll give you this loan here, and they're struggling, right? So the hyperinflation, they're going through a lot of unemployment. Argentina is going through hard times, so they need this debt, and so it's like they're drowning, and the IMF has a life preserver, and they're like, here you go, you can have it, but you got to do this. And each time they chip away at the sovereign rights of that nation and make them do their policy choices, which just so happen to be terrible. And they hurt the poor the most. They cut healthcare, they cut education, and they cut the things that actually really help people the most. And then this time with the stipulations, so the terms and conditions of this loan was, oh, you can't use Bitcoin, among other things probably, but oh, you can't use Bitcoin. And so this is what you're going to see the IMF do. But the thing is, they're going to lose because right now there's competition that's creeping up behind them for the first time in almost 100 years. And it comes in the form of this open monetary network that can be used by anybody. And they've been, just abusing the relationships with their borrowing countries for way, way too long. If you know anything about Argentina, there's almost an IMF riot. Seems like every single year there, from the people on the ground that are actually hurt by these policies. So, yeah, I'm really not surprised. I think it shows how scared they are. They don't want a country as big as Argentina to follow suit like El Salvador. But they're going to have to do this to every single country because every single country has been abused by the IMF. I mean, I could name off like 50 off the top of my head that have been abused like badly by the IMF, and then I could probably name 100 that have been mildly to badly abused by the IMF. So they're going to lose, man, and that's what I hope to see one day. So kind of pisses me off, but I'm more empathetic for the people of Argentina the most because they're going through about 60% inflation or something right now. And at the time when they need Bitcoin the most, the IMF is going, nope, can't have that. Let's get more debt. That'll do it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you nailed it on the head there. It's like the time that their people need it the most is when they're going to crack down and push against it. Just anecdotally too, I have a friend whose family has whose family's from Argentina, and they have like a house or maybe a couple properties out there, and they're looking to sell it. And they were talking about, potentially doing it in Bitcoin because of, how volatile that their, currency that they use in Argentina is. And he was asking me, what's the best way to do it? Is it possible? All this and that. And I'm like, yeah, 100%. And, obviously, he asked me that maybe like a week or so ago. So, and then this news came out like right afterwards. And he's like, yeah, now my dad and all that is worried about, just dealing with it. So it's really unfortunate, even when, Bitcoin has so much volatility and we see these massive swings. We're a little bit spoiled here in the United States where we see maybe like, 8% inflation numbers being reported, where in other countries you're seeing, this 40 to 50% number being thrown out. So,
Yeah,
I,
yeah, yeah. Like the thing, Argentines they've been dealing with inflation for a long time. They're almost like experts. I feel like there's been black markets for dollars uh, for a very long time. And I think there'll be black markets for Bitcoin. It probably already is, but like they'll figure out a way to use Bitcoin. This is like shutting down adoption at the banking level, but they're resilient people, I think, and I think they'll figure it out. But it's really just a top down crackdown, and it's really tragic because like Argentines like their government has been very corrupt too. It's not just the IMF's fault. Like it's probably unfair to like put all the blame on the IMF because there's also part of the responsibility lies at the government level, and so they've had a lot of problems with corruption there too. So the people of Argentina, very strong people that have gone through a lot. Unfortunately, a lot of hyperinflations, and they'll figure out a way to use Bitcoin. I think so. That's what my hope is.
Yeah, I think they've unfortunately had to learn the hard way, and through just their economic policies and everything that their country's kind of forcing them through. So, yeah, I hope it kind of leads them all to Bitcoin, and they see the true power in it. But
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So Sam, thank you so much for joining me. We've kind of mentioned how your writings at Swan Bitcoin, but why don't you sign us off and tell us, where we could find you and what else you got going on?
Yeah, man. I'm always on Twitter, like everyone else. That's where I share a lot of my thoughts, and I do some threads on there, share charts and stuff. So you can find me at Sam Calla, SamCallah. Can check out Swan at swan.com. Basically we offer a lot of different services around Bitcoin. So if you're a business and want to, have Bitcoin, if you want Bitcoin for your employees, we have Bitcoin benefit plans. If you want to gift Bitcoin, you can gift Bitcoin to somebody. I find that's a great way to orange pill. Just give some sats. If you're a high net worth individual and you want to buy Bitcoin, we have a white glove service that can help you and answer all your questions. So that's kind of my show of Swan, but you can go to the blog on Swan too, and I do a lot of writing on there as well. So check me out. Check me out on Twitter. Check out swan.com. And Brandon, thanks for having me, man. I'm a big fan of Green Candle. I've checked out some of your guys' charts every once in a while. They pop up. So good stuff over there. And thanks for having me on, man. It was a good conversation.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate your time, and yeah, we'll stay connected for sure. And I hope to interact with you a little bit more. And yeah, I know you do the cafe Bitcoin spaces as well every now and then too.
Yeah,
So
man. That's a good little show. That's Alex and my buddy Jacob's the producer there, and they really got a good thing going on there. So I like going on and drinking a coffee and just talking Bitcoin every morning. So you can check that out on Twitter Spaces, Cafe Bitcoin, and it's a good time. It's just Bitcoiners hanging out, talking Bitcoin, market developments, and if you listen to it, you understand what I'm talking about. It's just kind of like good vibes.
yeah, exactly. And I think Twitter Spaces is definitely a growing medium to kind of learn in like free form conversation. So I really really enjoy those. And yeah, if anybody listening here hasn't checked that out, I really do encourage you to at least just sit in and listen. You don't have to get up and talk or anything like that, but there's always a great conversation. So,
For
Sam,
sure.
thank you so much for your time today and all you do in Bitcoin. And yeah, well, maybe we'll have you back sometime on the future.
Would love to. Would love to, man. You have a good night, okay?
All right, man. You too. Have a good one.
Cheers.